Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast. It's September 25th. There are 41 days left of this election, and maybe we're going to survive. I had a rough day. I did not expect to have such a crappy day, but I did not figure out that going to the doctor for the first time since my mom died was going to be a triggering event. And I figured it out last night. Last night, I started having like anxiety and all these feelings and everything because my mom died from medical complications, kind of. She died from two aneurysms, but it's all got screwed up with the doctors. It got screwed up. And I've been holding a lot of resentment. And I'm also holding resentment because doctors can only see you for the things they're allowed to talk to you about. And then everything else has to get referred out to everybody else. And I'm like, I don't want to play this game anymore. Anywho, I realized that I had a big problem with going to the doctor. So I cried a lot today, but I'm better now. I'm better. And I was already kind of in a blue mood yesterday because of the execution that happened. We're going to talk about that. And I'm sorry we're going to talk about that because it's a hard thing to talk about. But the thing is I've had to walk in the shadow of the death penalty before. It came up during the Golden State Killer case. And I want to talk about that today because believe it or not, the death penalty does have something to do with our democracy. It from my standpoint, where I sit is really being the lawyer's daughter and caring a lot about justice and how justice is meted out and how and some of the systemic problems we have in our justice system. And if you think critical race theory is a crack, you're just not a critical thinker. Only people who are unable to think in the abstract and be able to be a critical thinker are able to understand the systemic racism built into our justice system right now. And if that upsets you for the wrong reasons, I don't know what to do with you. Go vote for Trump and I'll see you later. It's not going to work out well for you, is what I'm saying. If you don't care about the least of us, that's a problem. We all should be caring about the least of us. So let me tell you what's going on with the death penalty and why I have strong feelings about this and why I think actually we've been kind of quiet on the death penalty. This used to be a big deal about, I want to say maybe 25 years ago, kind of in the 90s, 80s, 90s. It was a big deal in the 80s too. But the death penalty was like we hear about abortion today. The death penalty used to be in the conversation a lot. It was a hot topic, and the authoritarians love it because they want top-down punishment. And the liberals say, wait a minute, we need to look at prison reform. And really, what the hell have we done? Are we redeeming anyone? And if we just kill people, how are we any better than the killers themselves? Now, I happen to subscribe to that belief. I think that my humanity comes from my ability to not kill others. I believe very strongly that is my humanity. My humanity says there is an ability to exist with people who are maybe not redeemable, but there's still an ability to exist with them. They might need to be in prison. Someone who is not redeemable, and I happen to think most people are, but some people are not redeemable. And some people aren't, and some people have cashed in on their opportunity to be redeemable. I will grant you that as well, because I do think there are people out there who make some incredibly bad choices. And we're going to talk about one of those humans here in a minute. But the fact is, we've got flaws in our justice system, which, as you know, my neurodivergence is justice. And so I really go crazy over the flaws. So the death penalty was charged in the Golden State Killer case. That is why it is part of my story. And in fact, I actually engaged that particular aspect of the case, which I'm happy to talk about at length with anybody who wants to know. But one of the things you could do, because we had a capital murder case, capital meaning that it was going to have the death penalty, it was charged, the death penalty was asked for. It changes the role of victims. And because I had a murder, I had a rape and a murder. My dad and my stepmother were both killed, but my stepmother was raped. The DNA that convicted Joseph DeAngelo was found in my stepmother. 40 years later, they kept that DNA in a freezer in Ventura. There were two samples. That was very highly unusual for that time, 1980. Two samples. That DNA from inside my stepmother, I didn't realize that till later to the trial, but that DNA was what they used to convict, to find and essentially ultimately convict him. We had to go back for some more buccal swabs, which are those little things they put in your cheek. But you can go read all my lawyer's daughter stuff if you want to go. It's all the other murder stuff. If you're into true crime, there's, boy, do I have true crime for you. But let me go back to this case and how it pertains to yesterday. So we have in a capital case, one of the things you can do when it's decided to be a death penalty case, the state allows the defense attorneys, that means D'Angelo's attorneys, to reach out to us. And it is they reach out to you and say, look, this is a death penalty case. We'd like you to talk to, and they have a intermediary. I forget what they're called, but they're an intermediary that's there to talk to victims about the death penalty. And it's really, I think, to tone it down, to not have people be pro-death penalty, because it's coming from the defense, right? But I didn't take the meeting. I didn't take the meeting with the third party. I took the meeting with D'Angelo's attorneys. And again, that's a whole other thing. And that was fascinating. And I do enjoy talking about it because my dad was also a defense attorney, was both a prosecutor, a district attorney, and a defense attorney. And so I had both points of view, which is capable. I'm capable of having 2 points of view. So my point is that all these things happen when you're the victim and the death penalty is kicked in. And we have a responsibility. We, the victims, have a responsibility to clarify how we feel about that. The prosecutors were interested in our point of view. Now, I happen to be anti-death penalty. In fact, my whole family is. So if you think it's just a Jen thing, it's not. We were raised by my dad, a lawyer who absolutely believed the risk was worse than the reward in terms of the risk of accidentally killing somebody who didn't deserve it. And that's where we are. So when I read about the news from, and I really hold the governor responsible. The governor of Missouri is a piece of shit. So I'll just say it, because at no point did he even begin to consider what he should have considered. It is his responsibility. It's his job responsibility. Let's just take ethics, morals, religion, all those other things away. It's his job responsibility to handle commutations. And we weren't even asking for a commutation of this. We were just saying, please do not execute this man. And yet here we are. So let's review for people that are new to the death penalty and didn't live through it in the 80s and 90s like the rest of us. The death penalty is still one of the most controversial U.S. Issues in the U.S., and it ties to the values we hold dear in democracy. Yes, this is a democracy issue, including, here's what how it ties into democracy: justice, fairness, and the protection of individual rights, right? You do in this country have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not happiness itself, just that pursuit. But you can go pursue it. Those are part of what our country stands for, right? It's in the Constitution, right there at the top. Roll. That's cruel. That's cool. But here's the problem. If those things are so important, it is a great risk. We take a great risk when we execute someone. In fact, there's a legal maxim that says it's better that 10 guilty people escape than 1 innocent suffer. Like, that's our values, right? You don't want to ever kill somebody who's innocent. Although that's what we did yesterday. Today, the whole idea of being just is what is reflected in our core principles of fairness in our legal system. And if there's a question, we err on the side of caution. We don't err on the side of execution. If at any point you feel like, I'm not sure, remember reasonable doubt, that's a illegal concept. And I've been thinking a lot about reasonable doubt lately, because it's kind of a reasonable way to approach it. And if you think of how juries actually end up rendering verdicts, especially when it's based on truthful information during the trial, and that's really the biggest caveat of trials, right? Information presented has to be truthful. If you aren't watching Monsters right now, and I'm going to be careful about this endorsement, there's a new show about the Menendez brothers out on Netflix called Monsters. I'm watching it. I started it thinking, what is this? I was intrigued because I've heard that one of the boys was upset about it, and men now. But I got to tell you, this thing is really well written. It's going to be a trigger for anybody with any sexual assault issues. I honestly, it is super hard to watch. It is loaded with stuff that will make you ill. And the problem is, you're just never sure about any of it. And so when I say, if the evidence produced, and the reason I brought up Monsters is about the evidence produced in court. If the evidence produced in court is truthful and can be supported, juries render good verdicts because reasonable doubt. So in 24 states today, we still, and it's Monsters on Netflix, but you've been warned, I told you, there's parts, it is really, really intense and kind of messed up what you're going to hear on that show. And I still don't know what's true. So let's just put it there. I'm not finished yet, but I still don't know what's true. Today in 24 states, we still have the death penalty, and 23 states have abolished death penalty. I don't know if it's abolished in California. I know it's on hold. We just froze it. That's it. 3 have moratoriums in place. That's us. We don't have it in place right now. The states that retain the death penalty tend to lean on more conservative, tend to lean conservative. This is not surprising to me. The death penalty is extremely punitive. It's often tied into the Bible and an eye for an eye. It's not just the Bible. Other religious homes have this kind of eye for eye mentality. I would say thousands and thousands of years ago, that kind of makes some sense because we weren't that sophisticated yet. But today, well, we did have the ancient Greek, so we were pretty damn sophisticated. But in religious circles, I'm not sure. Fewer tools, all kinds of stuff. But here we are now. We're in the majority of the states that still use the death penalty are conservative, and the majority of the executions still happen in the South or the Midwest, Missouri, looking at you, in a region politically dominated by Republicans. Does it mean the death penalty aligns with democratic values? In a true democracy where justice is fair and equal, the death penalty could seem out of place, especially when it's being applied unjustly. So that is why you're going to see a lot of liberals who believe that there's a way to move forward. I think that's probably the best definition of liberalism at this time. Liberalism is all the ideas and how do we move humanity, us, human beings, forward, not backward. We don't want to become more Neanderthal. We want to kind of keep breeding that Neanderthal out of us, right? That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to become better people, better humans, more thoughtful, more enlightened, more forgiving, more patient, more understanding. That's what we're trying to be. Well, at least some of us. Okay, since 1973, I don't have the exact to the minute numbers, but roughly 190 people have been exonerated. That's a big word for not guilty from death row, proving they were wrongfully convicted. That is nearly 200 people. I'm going to bet most of them are men. And now we have Marcellus Williams. Marcellus is who was murdered yesterday by the state of Missouri. There was DNA evidence that exonerated him. Absolutely, positively. The prosecution had told everyone, the prosecution, the people who get the bad guys, the prosecutors who are the least likely humans on the whole face of the planet to say the guy's not guilty. We made a mistake. The people who made the mistake owned their mistake. And they told everybody they could tell. It's been going on for about 2 months. They've been trying to tell everybody they could tell. We found DNA. We went back and had the DNA tested. This man is exonerated. What are we doing? And yet, thanks to the incredible, what I'm going to call it, racism and hate of the governor of Missouri, he was executed yesterday. Marcellus Williams was executed. And now, great, he gets to be a poster child for jackassery and evil. What a wonderful thing for poor Marcellus. He was already serving a long, long sentence. He already served a sentence for something he didn't do. He was already in prison. All right, my head's going to explode. So cases like this raise serious concerns about the death penalty because it is not being used in a just and consistent way, especially when the people responsible for doing the executions are not owning up to their responsibility in their jobs. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. If you're going to kill somebody, you have a responsibility to check that, I don't know, 75 times, 100 times. If you're killing someone, how many times is reasonable to keep making sure that you're doing the right thing? And I'm this. Here's why. Let me compare my case, my Golden State Killer case, it is an outlier because it's a serial killer, which is like 0.01% of killers out there. Okay, that's an outlier, but I don't care about all that part. That part's not the important part. Let me tell you what the important part is, okay? Let's just focus here for a minute. DNA guilty. Joseph DeAngelo, a white middle-class man, lived a seemingly ordinary life as a former police officer and mechanic, but underneath his facade, he was responsible for some of the most heinous crimes in California history. 13 murders, actually it might be 15. 13 murders, over 50 rapes, and countless burglaries. He did a lot of peeping too. DeAngelo was arrested in 2018 without incident. I mean, without incident. I don't think they even messed up his skin. I'm not sure if he had a bruise from the handcuffs. That's how gently he was arrested. Super gently. unbelievably gently. If I could, oh, if I could tell you what he did to his rape victims, it makes me angry this man didn't have any physical pain in his arrest. That I would have been down for. Okay. And he was arrested with that incident. And despite the horrors he inflicted on countless victims and their families, including my own, I'm sorry, that was my second clause of my sentence, but he did so many bad things. And like I said, he didn't even hurt his poor little body, his fucking poor little body. All right. So we know he's DNA guilty. That was my first call when I found out he had been arrested. I called the DA and said, is he DNA guilty? And they're like, yes, he is. And that was all I needed to know. So D'Angelo, though not wealthy, he had the benefit of being middle class. So this is still my serial rapist, right? My serial murderer. It gave him access to a stable employment, education, and the ability to secure legal representation. Oh, yeah. D'Angelo didn't hurt for needing lawyers. He had actually a really great, one of the lawyers he had that I became friends with is fantastic. So yes, he had all that accessible to him. And, you know, as a serial killer, he like kind of got extra. This is one of the ironies of being a prolific criminal. Because you're so prolific, your defense is already, actually think about this, this happens anywhere, because when you're a prolific criminal, your defense becomes instantly more complicated and it is instantly more attended. People are much more interested in this as a complicated convict. And so he gets more legal support. He gets more attention. He gets more resources, all that stuff, because he was actually a worse criminal. Okay. Because of the gravity of his crimes, the DNA proving his guilt. Oh, I'm sorry. This is really important. I forgot what paragraph here. Because this man was, had all these good things going for him, serial killer, white man, former cop, and everything, he became a political hot ticket. This is really important because I think this is also the case in Missouri, but from the opposite point of view. D'Angelo's prosecuting D'Angelo was like a feather in people's cap, right? I'm prosecuting the serial killer, the Golden State Killer. Thanks, Michelle McNamara, for such a lovely name. I hate the Golden State Killer. I wish it had such a pretty name. Golden State's a great name, shouldn't be associated with the name killer. But the deal is that the prosecutors, most of them were Republican. I don't know why, it just kind of turned out that way, based on the jurisdictions that were involved and where we were. Although I'm not sure Anne Marie Schubert, I don't remember about Anne Marie Schubert. She was the Sacramento DA. So she was the big dog of the case. She might have been a Republican, I don't remember. But most of them were, and they saw the opportunity to use our case as a high-profile platform, furthering their careers by positioning themselves as champions of justice around this notorious serial killer. In fact, there is a speech, he did it a couple times. When they announced the death penalty, this Republican prosecutor from Orange County came up, and one of the victims from Orange County came up. And again, you can go see what it is from the history of that case, but they politicized it so hard. And I am so lucky because without knowing it, the female victims were kind of corralled in this area to stand behind the one male victim from Orange County, Mr. Harrington. They put all the women behind him, and the women didn't know what was going on. We didn't know any of this. None of the other victims were included in this strategy, just the Orange County team. Mr. Harrington had come up with the guy from Orange County. They're in collusion about a bunch of stuff. I don't care. Republican bullshit stuff that I don't care about. It's Orange County. And even though California, Orange County is a Republican big stronghold. So these two jerks, in my opinion, completely used those women who did not know why they were sitting there. And many of them did not support the death penalty. They used them as props for a press release that happened spontaneously, or so one might think, after our hearing on the death penalty. So it wasn't spontaneous. It was always the plan. That's why everybody was there. And then there was a huge fundraiser after that. The reason that they were all in town was the big district attorney fundraiser for Republicans in Sacramento that night. I lost my shit. I couldn't believe they were using our case as a fundraiser. But you need to understand that if justice is commingled with politics, and this is the problem with electing judges right now, I almost feel like we should have advisory boards, appoint them, and citizen advisory boards, because when you combine justice, which is supposed to be fair, neutral, and unbiased, with politics, which is freaking biased and positional and all about a point of view, when those two things are combined, it is a bad environment. It's not good for the victims. It's not good for the accused, and it's really not good for the people, as far as I'm concerned, because it makes then, when politics becomes part of justice, the only way justice can happen is in a very polarized way, right? Guilty or innocent, no in between. And there's a lot of cases that are on the in between. They just are. There's factors on both sides. So politics should not be part of justice. And yet, by politicizing the district attorneys and making them elected offices, and by politicizing judges and making those elective offices, we've absolutely conflated the principle of absolute truth and justice with the craven desire to sway the public in politics. That's a big deal. So here we go. So they politicized our case, which really pissed me off. And because of the gravity of his crime, the DNA evidence proving his guilt, he faced the death penalty. D'Angelo did. And his crimes were premeditated. He thought about them. He fantasized about them, right? They had multiple murderers. He killed many people, and he was decompensating in Los Angeles. So it was even getting worse as he got to Orange County. It was worse than our murder. I mean, it just got worse. They were bad, but I mean, it got worse. And then he did some kidnapping, moving the victims around. That was how we were able to try some of the rape cases that had already passed the statute of limitations. And then when you become a death penalty case, it triggers even other victim services and processes. It's a big, big deal when you're in a death penalty case. So he's DNA guilty. I'm not worried about any of this. He gets the death penalty. I'm not for that, but I know in California we're not executing him. The part that really pisses me off, if somebody gets the death penalty, and the part that I think is just not about justice, is that death penalty convicts don't go in general population, or gen pop as it's called. Because I'm hip to the lingo like that. I'm gen pop, ag seg, me. I'm all about that stuff. Just but the point is that they don't go into the general population. And that is all I wanted for D'Angelo. I couldn't think of anything better than to have an ex-cop in the general population with his peers. And that's really important to me, because I do think when you do a bad thing, you need to be with the people who are like you. You need to see yourself reflected in your peers. That's how we all check ourselves. We go and see how we're reflected in other things. He needed to know he reflected in other pieces of shit. So what he needed to know. But no, he's in a private cell in administrative segregation because he's not on death row. He's considered a high risk criminal because people will want to kill him. Look at that. Now, I want you to be really clear. Somebody dying in prison because he does something that gets himself killed is very different to me than the death penalty. I like him being involved in his life. I think death penalty is, we've taken all the power away from everybody and put it in the hands of the state. And once the state's killing people, we got a problem. And I do think we need prison reform, but that's not anything there. So let's talk about when you're DNA exonerated, right? D'Angelo's DNA guilty. I talk about that all the time. That's like, I should just put that on a shirt, because I love DNA guilty. That takes my need to know and puts it in a really happy place. I got no reasonable doubt whatsoever. But guess what? What if you're DNA exonerated? In the case of Marcellus Williams, we have a black man, not a white man, from a low-income background, not a middle-class background. He never had D'Angelo's advantages. He was convicted of the 1998, so he has been in jail a long time, murder of Felicia Gale, and she was a reporter, as I understand. Williams, the man we killed, had maintained his innocence throughout his trial and appeals. Okay, everybody always says they're innocent, because some of them are. It's really true. And the politics surrounding his case, however, was quite different. And now remember, we're talking about politics and what happens when you commingle justice with politics. Bad things happen. The politics, despite concerns over racial discrimination and jury selection, meaning they didn't let any Black people be on the jury, and DNA evidence that exonerated him, Missouri moved forward with his execution yesterday. The state of Missouri, with a predominantly conservative leadership, refused to stay the execution despite the pressure from advocacy groups and legal organizations and their own prosecution, that the state prosecutors who said he didn't do it. The Williams case did not have the political shine of a serial killer. Instead, it was marred, and this is it. This case was a stinker, as they say, not the human being involved. No, the case was a real stinker. It's so like you even hear that get written as lines sometimes on police shows. Oh, this one's a stinker. Okay, it was marred by the systemic racism embedded in the justice system, particularly in Missouri, where prosecutors and officials ignored significant doubts about his guilt. The politics in Missouri worked against Williams. He was a black man convicted of killing a white woman, and the pressure to maintain a tough on crime stance outweighed the pursuit of true justice. And just right now, for our tiny, tiny time warp into right this minute, you have Trump running around in his ridiculously small rallies at this point. I think we only had 300 people today, talking about how he's going to incarcerate and execute everyone. He has lost his, he's lost his damn mind. His mind has been gone for a long time. But the things he's saying should make everyone angry because he's talking about just killing people. That's not something the state does. It's not something the state should be doing, is killing people. So here we go. We have this poor man who, was a real stinker. He was just a stinker. And so while DNA has revolutionized how we've handled criminal cases, in fact, I can do a whole podcast on that because I've got privacy issues around DNA. The legal system is still lagging behind in its ability to act swiftly when DNA evidence is brought forward, especially when it comes to exoneration. Everybody wants to jump up and down and claim poll holes and the whole GED match and all these websites and everything about DNA and say, we got to do this to convict the bad guys. You know what? We got to do it to exonerate the innocent too, but we don't move with the same alacrity, do we? We don't move with speed, and we certainly don't move with soulless, with a soul and with good judgment, because it didn't happen. The governor just simply refused. So we have someone who's been DNA exonerated. The legal system did not move to take care of this. The lag disproportionately, this lag that happens all the time when you're DNA exonerated, disproportionately affects people of color, those living in poverty. And this, just if you didn't believe critical race theory, it's right here. You can't miss it. Okay. Oh God, I'm still on the same slide because I got so caught up in this. I don't even have, this is my dad. This is just me and my dad in one of my favorite pictures. My favorite pictures. This is before my dad. Like, this is when I was still almost an only child. I think my brother might be on the way at this point. But there we are. That's in 1964, I think it is. So, and I don't have a lot of slides today because I was too worked up about this. When it comes to political footballs, let's take a look at this. The Golden case, this is the part that makes me mad. If you look at why this man was executed, it really comes down to politics and not guilt or innocence. Because if it was about guilt or innocence, this man would be alive today. He was murdered. A man who did not commit murder was murdered by the state. The Golden State Killer case gave Republicans, the prosecutors, the district attorneys, a platform to advance their careers. Marcellus Williams' case shows how politics can work in the opposite direction. His case was not one where prosecutors would earn political favor by stopping an execution. If anything, they'd get shade for trying not to kill a black man who was convicted. He was convicted, everybody says. He was convicted. Guess what? You didn't have all the evidence. Oh, we already know there was little jury management issues, but moreover, you didn't have all the evidence, did you? Got it, but you didn't have all the evidence. So it's easy to see somebody convicted you. You could get a conviction if you don't have all the evidence. Okay, so denying clemency for a black man convicted of murdering a white woman is not seen as politically advantageous in Missouri, right? I mean, I'm sorry, denying clemency is seen as politically advantageous because that's a trope. Black man kills white woman. It used to end with, and is hanging from a tree. That's how it used to end, just so you're clear. We did it again yesterday. We just did the same goddamn thing yesterday. The racial undertones and lack of political will to reverse Williams' fate, reflects on how deeply embedded bias can be in the influence of life or death decisions. So we're talking about bias. And this is why I want to keep bringing it back to justice it's intended to be clean. It can't be perfectly clean, but it's intended to be clean. It's supposed to be based on evidence, and I'm sorry, another Jen Carroll, just pull one out from under the desk, Jen, another soapbox. I'm really curious. if AI could possibly be effective in jurisprudence, only from a nuts and bolts, straight up facts and data perspective. I would really be interested to see how a computer who doesn't have any emotion, and I don't know if a computer has bias, so that's something we'd have to find out in the AI, because the AI could have bias. I'd really be interested to see, just based on facts, like where people come out, like, oh, let's put in your crime, let's put in what you did, let's put in the data that we have. D'Angelo did all these things. Here's his DNA. His DNA was collected at most of the sites because he did it in the olden days before we knew about DNA. Have it. What do you come out? What does it spit out as a recommended sentence and all that? I think that would be interesting. In this case, especially when you put in no DNA, it should just say, street him. But one of the things I overheard, and I don't have any data for it, I overheard that one of the biggest issues here is they didn't want to pay a Black man for being jailed illegally, for being under false circumstances. They didn't want to have to give him a check. They'd rather kill him than admit they made a mistake. Kill him. This isn't a little tiny thing that says kill him. The difference in D'Angelo and Williams lies in their crimes. D'Angelo was prolific. This man killed one person, but he didn't kill him. This was about one person's murder. Their race, white versus Black, class, middle income versus poor, and how their cases were handled politically. D'Angelo received life in prison. Inevitably, he received life in prison. I had a little something to do with that. I didn't know that until much later. Turns out I was part of the influencing in that case. He was white and middle class and became a political chess piece for his prosecutors to gain recognition. On the other hand, Marcellus Williams was DNA exonerated, innocent, and he was executed. There were no political gains to be had other than pulling off the execution. That Missouri governor thinks he did a good thing. That's the sickest part of the whole thing. So so you might not know about this, or you might. This isn't just about guilt or innocence, but how our system unequally applies justice, right? That's really what I keep coming back to. You got to take politics out of it if you're going to have justice. The two together are not good bedfellows. And there is someone on this planet who has led her whole life, as far as I can tell, pursuing this kind of injustice. It's Sister Helen Prejean. If you don't know about her, this is back in the 80s and 90s when this was a big deal. Sister Helen was everywhere. And I kind of loved her. She is a kick-ass nun. And she sits right in this roast soup of legal injustice, politics, and racial inequity, the whole inequity of the system. She is frantically made it her life's work to call for justice reform. And back in the day, there was a movie called Dead Man Walking, starring Sean Penn. And Sean and Helen, Sister Prejean, are buddies. And this movie is worth watching. Dead Man Walking, really good movie. Sean's a lot younger. This is an old movie, but I think a lot of younger people haven't seen this movie and haven't thought about this issue because we've kind of not talked about it lately. So if you're Gen Z, or even if you're like in your 30s, this might not be something that's top of mind. And it's really going to be somebody in their 40s and older who starts to go, remember that. This was a thing. This was a big deal. And we had a lot of feelings about it. In fact, I would say death penalty is right up there with abortion in terms of controversy in this country. And it's interesting because it's both have to do with life and death, right? And you could almost find the correspondence between people who were anti-abortion and pro-death penalty. Seriously, those two things sit together. And I truly believe it's what I wrote about the other day. It has everything to do with authoritative reasoning. If you don't think for yourself, you will think that the others have done thinking for you and they have the right answers. And I'm going to tell you that's not true. The most scary part of that whole logic that you just did, that the people in power know what they're doing, is that's not true. It's not true. The best and the brightest are not leading our country. We have some good people, but the best and the brightest are not leading the country. They get paid way more in corporate America. Come on, guys, let's think about this. All right, so I need the reason I'm bringing up Sister Helen Prejean because she's on Twitter right now. She's out in social media because of what just happened yesterday. She was fighting for Marcellus, and so I want you to expose yourself to her because she comes from theocracy. She comes from a theological point of view, and in her world, Jesus didn't say go kill. in her world, she's already worked through the eye for an eye stuff as being very simplistic and not really the intention. So I want to bring her up to you because what she wants to fight this authoritarian reasoning. Now, authoritative reasoning, you can think of an authoritarian regime where there's somebody in charge who tells you what to do, right? That's kind of top down. But I want you to think about authoritative reasoning, which is when your reason for doing something is because someone said so. That's the thought I want to challenge. Right there, right at that moment in your psyche, when you say, because someone said so, that's where I want to make you think. Because that's not a good reason. That's authoritative reasoning. And that really just means you're being obedient and probably maybe choosing not to pay attention. You might also be choosing, ignorance feels like a strong word, but you might be choosing to opt out and just go with authoritative reasoning. It might be that you just feel better about that. But challenge you on that shit. That's not your job. Your job is to use noggin. I want you thinking. I want you thinking about it. Because if you accept it as being something you take on as a value, if you say executing someone is something I believe in, you're going to need to know why, and it can't be because someone said so. Get my point? All right, so justice reform is not just about changing laws, but it's about changing how we view fairness, and it's about dealing with some of the ugliness that we have attached to our justice system right now, which is built-in bias, racism, economic differences. We have different access to legal resources. We have different access to being able to hire a private investigator to defend yourself or not. We have so many problems. And by the way, in all of this mess, the victim's experience isn't great either. Like the prosecution does not work for us. Prosecution works for the state. So our justice system has a lot of opportunity for improvement. How's that for saying it that way? All right. Thank you for listening to today's pod. Think about what happened. Think about what your values are. I'm going to come back to this all the time. Think about what your values are and what you believe in, and don't believe in them because someone told you. Believe in them because you questioned it and you reasoned it out and it makes sense to you. So that if you're standing at the pearly gates and you have to justify, if that governor of Missouri, that's a perfect way to end this. If that governor of Missouri is standing at the pearly gates right now, I don't care what religion you are. You can put any religion you want. We're just going to call them pearly gates. And you're justifying your actions on this earth. I want to know how that man who knows that Marcellus was innocent, I want to know how that man's going to justify his decision today. Thank you for listening. I'll be back tomorrow with something also incredibly controversial, but it's time. We got to start looking at some of these issues. Thanks, everybody. Look forward to talking to you tomorrow.